Hello class, Mr. Jen here with Chapter 16, Lesson 3. It is called Secession and War. So this whole chapter, and really the chapters before it if you were paying very close attention, had been like watching a fuse burn. Hello class, Mr. Jen here with Chapter 16, Lesson 3. It's called Secession and War. So this whole chapter, and really the chapters before it if you were paying very closely attention, has been like watching a fuse burn on one of those old bombs. It just keeps burning and burning, and you're not sure where it's going to end, but you know when it gets there, it's going to be bad. Today that bomb goes off. It's Fort Sumter, and it signifies the beginning of the bloodiest war in American history. So the election of 1860, where we start off, was pretty tense. People were questioning if the Union could survive. Sectional differences were just becoming too great. And there were four candidates in the election of 1860. Abraham Lincoln was the Republican. Their platform was slavery could stay where it was, but would not be allowed in any of the territories. The Democrats had actually been split in two. There were now Northern Democrats and Southern Democrats. Northern Democrats ran Stephen Douglas, Lincoln's old nemesis. He ran on the idea basically of popular sovereignty, or letting the territories decide whether or not to be a free or a slave state. Southern Democrats ran John Breckinridge, who of course supported slavery in the South and popular sovereignty in the territories. A new party of national moderates formed called the Constitutional Union Party, and they kind of just ignored the issue of slavery in an attempt to keep the Union together. The Constitutional Union Party ran a guy by the name of John Bell right here. Alright, Abraham Lincoln ended up winning the election, with voting going somewhat as expected along regional lines. Breckinridge, the Southern Democrat, of course, won most of the South. Lincoln, in orange, won most of the North, with Douglas and Bell taking a few states here and there. You see Bell took some of the more northern regions of the South, and Douglas took a couple states. Douglas, actually, if you'll notice, won a great deal of the popular vote, but as we know, popular vote doesn't win elections. You need electoral votes. Basically, when you get down to it, there was more population in the North, and that higher population outvoted the South, and as a result, Abraham Lincoln won. Now, the South was furious about this, as Abraham Lincoln wasn't even on the ballot in most of the southern states. South Carolina, as a result of the election and Lincoln winning, seceded from the Union. They left the United States. On December 20th, 1860, there were some last-ditch efforts at compromise, but no agreements could be reached. They just didn't trust the Republican president to respect them or their rights or their way of life. So the Confederacy is born by February of 1861. So you got December 20th, 1860. In the course of really a month or two, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, and Georgia had joined South Carolina in seceding. They sent delegates to meet and form a new government, which became the Confederate States of America. They made former Army officer Jefferson Davis their president. Now, they justified their secession by saying it was about states' rights. The Constitution, they said, was like a contract that states voluntarily joined and could leave. They left because the federal government broke that contract by refusing to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act in the North and denying southern states' rights within the territories. Now, not everyone was pleased about this turn of events. Some Southerners rejoiced in the streets, but others were pretty worried about it, including Robert E. Lee, who would be a very significant military commander of Confederate forces once the Civil War starts. In the North, there were some people that pretty much said good riddance to the South. Screw those guys. However, most of the Union was actually, most of the people in the North thought that the Union had to be preserved, that this couldn't happen. So as always is the case, there are a few months between the election and the new president taking office, with states seceding and all, everyone wondered what Abraham Lincoln would say in his inaugural address. What would he do? There were still some slave states that hadn't seceded with the rest of the South. If Lincoln was too harsh, or if he immediately attacked the Confederacy when he took office, the Southern states that had stayed in the Union might leave to go join the Confederacy. So they weren't sure what was going to happen. It finally comes. We have a picture, and here's what he said. Part of it, anyways. In your hands, my dissatisfied countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war. The government will not assail you. You have no conflict without being yourselves the aggressors. We are not your enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. So Lincoln had vowed to hold on to federal property in the South, such as forts and other military installations, things like that. And he said the Union must be maintained and that he could not allow secession, but with that being said, it was clear he was trying to avoid war. That brings us to Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter was a fortress guarding Charleston Harbor. That's off very near the coast of South Carolina. It was manned by U.S. soldiers who were now in the awkward predicament of technically being in a Union fort within the Confederacy. A few days after Lincoln took office, he received word from Fort Sumter that the Confederacy was demanding the fort's surrender and that the fort was low on supplies. So they, kind of boxed in there and they're running out of supplies. Lincoln sent a telegram to the governor of South Carolina explaining, like, hey, I want to supply my troops. We're not going to take any guns. We're not going to shoot at you unless you shoot at us first. But before those supplies could reach Fort Sumter, Jefferson Davis ordered an attack on the fort. Confederate forces bombarded the fort for 2 days. Rough seas prevented the U.S. Navy from moving in to help. So basically, the fortress was just getting bombarded. They had to surrender after a couple of days. Lincoln, at this point, had no choice but to issue a call for troops. War it would be. At this point, when he called for troops and war became imminent, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas all joined the Confederacy. The Civil War had begun. We have a picture of Fort Sumter here. On the next page is your basic quiz, 5 questions, 10 points. And you have 2 attempts. All right. Short but very significant lesson. That is the end of the chapter. Chapter 17 is a 5-lesson chapter, all about the Civil War, of course. So for now, go ahead and take the quiz, study day tomorrow, and then the test. All right, if you need anything, let me know. Have a wonderful day.